Get ready, I have presenter cards this time. Let me know, I can already start, right? Hello everyone, good to see you all here. Thank you for coming. Hello everyone online, thank you also for joining us. My name is Bruno, Alves Almeida, I'm curator at the Eyck. And on behalf of the Eyck and Hisham Khalidi, the director, who could not be here unfortunately tonight, we'd like to welcome you in-house and online. So tonight we have Dreaming and Futuring, where we will explore the parallels between dreaming and alternative techniques of futuring. So in a time when we are surrounded by increasingly accurate depictions of our future through scenario planning, trend watching, climate modeling, among others, it feels urgent to discuss the frameworks and actors which devise and circulate these futures. It is also important to think what these depictions can do in the present, when the ability to imagine a sustainable future still feels like an insurmountable challenge for most of us. This difficulty might point to the need of engaging differently with the world and with each other. It might also point to the need of engaging differently with our senses and cognitions in imagining these coming worlds. So could the attention to the symbolic and affective associations created in dreams foster transformative visions of the future and mobilize action in the present? So tonight we have contributions that will address these and other questions. We have Dr. Sidarta Ribeiro online, who is joining us from Lisbon, but he's a neuroscientist based in Brazil who has developed influential research on the individual and social cultural significance of dreams. We have Hoffman from the Urban Future Studios in the University of Utrecht, who have been experimenting with alternative techniques of futuring. And we also have our in-house artist, current participant of the Eyck, Godínez Nivón, who will tell us more about the Oneiric assembly, which we, not all, but some of us already experienced this afternoon, and I think we're still slowly sinking into it and digesting it. And some of you also got this invitation, which is now being repurposed as a presenter card. So tonight's event and also this workshop that Danielle is leading and that will unfold in the upcoming months kickstarts the process for or towards the urgency intensive of this year. And the Urgency Intensive is an annual program that the Eyck established under the directorship of Hisham. And with this program, we put on public discussion what is the role of art and what is the civic agency of art and cultural practices in relation to, climate change and climate breakdown, actually. For this edition of the Urgency Intensive this year in September, we will pick up a conversation or discussion that we had last year around the IPACC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Art and Climate Change, which refers to the existing IPCC that many of you might know. And last year, it served as a boundary object for discussion between a present generation, a group of professionals from the present, and a group of professionals 7 generations ahead in the future, in a speculative role play around what this institution could be, the prospects and challenges of it, and of course, consequentially, what is the role of art now and for the future generations. This year, in September, we take the structure of the existing IPCC, which is structured in 3 working groups, and we propose a 4th working group under the framework of the IPACC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Art and Climate Change. So the report from Working Group 2 of the existing IPCC was published some days ago, on the last days of February, The upcoming report, the third report, will be published in the end of this month. Beginning of April is still being assessed. And those three reports make up the sixth assessment report, which is a comprehensive document presenting the state of scientific, technical, and socio-economic knowledge on climate change. So for the IPACC Working Group 4, we want to put some more questions in the table and try to see what else can be discussed within the frameworks of this interconnection between arts, culture, and that broad categorization and scientific knowledge with, for example, the integration of arts, social sciences, and humanities within a discussion that is still pretty much dominated by hard sciences. But coming back to today, we are going to talk about the future, but not necessarily the future in September. So today we start this process leading up to this discussion, and of course in an intergovernmental panel on art and climate change, there's no way an assessment process is only about dealing with quantifiable data and objective information. So we want to experiment with methodologies engaging the intellect, but also other senses, different layers of cognition, and try to understand if we can, through that, open up new avenues for cross-pollination between different modes of knowledge. And I think there's no better way of doing it than dreaming together. And that's why I want to introduce you to Daniel Godínez Nivón, who is an artist and current participant of the Eyck, responsible for this beautiful drawing. And Daniel will tell us more about his artistic practice, centered and long-term practice around dreaming as research and learning tools, and also tools for healing and communing. So again, thank you for being here. The floor is yours, Daniel. Should I help you? I'll bring the water.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Bruno, for the introduction, for making this possible, and thank you all of you for being here. And really happy to share this space with Jesse from Urban Futures and Professor Sidarta. Such an honor. And okay, so I'm really happy to share these words with all of you, and I will read this text. The Oneiric Assembly. The Peruvian journalist Leonardo Tello recounts what the Brazilian theologian Leonardo Boff witnessed at a congress in the Brazilian Amazon. Attendees expected an indigenous person to speak before them and ask an elderly leader of the Yanomami people to say a few words. But he only spoke the last day and said, "I have spent these days here listening to everything you have spoken. It was difficult for me, and every night I was attentive to see if I dreamed. But I did not dream, so I cannot tell you anything. Now I go back to my town to see if I dream, and when I dream, I'll have something to say." What would happen if before a meeting or discussion on climate change, we try to meet in a dream, in an Oneiric assembly? Where I hail from, where I come from, Mexico, people that are capable of dreaming are deemed wise. In the vast cultural diversity of Mexico, when we talk about dreams, we talk about collective work, a practice that guides life and an ability to relate to time beyond the material world. It is a deep resistance, the root of a time that precedes us. As Professor Sidarta has expressed in his work, I also share the idea that 500 years ago, with the so-called conquest of Mexico, we began to lose our deep relationship with dreams and the experience of time that resides within them. of their inherent reality. In Mexico, in many Zapotec, Triqui, and Mixtec communities in Oaxaca, there is a direct relationship between people who heal, dreams, and nature. When they are very young, future doctors and midwives know they will become that because they dream about it. And in that reality, they experience for the first time the knowledge of healing. It is a practice awakening and the first incentive of curiosity to understand the human body in its complex relationship within the material and spiritual world. Therefore, the training of these indigenous populations, future doctors, began through images, sometimes accompanied by bodily sensations, presented to them in dreams. In these images, the dreamer sees their hands shining, or they find themselves carefully observing plants from the region or looking at a body in an unusual way, to gradually understand how it relates with the environment. Sometimes it is said that in dreams, they can encounter a teacher who guides and instructs them on how to see and perceive illness and the best way to find a cure. Knowing how to cure involves an immense sensibility that implies seeing life and nature with different eyes. In the Oneiric assembly arises from the need to recover our ability and freedom to dream our own dreams, to use them as a practice of time, an ancestral relationship with the world we inhabit. In this way, dreams experience individuality or by a community in a creative work process can be used as an experiential knowledge tool through specific thoughts, deliberations, and experiences. Dreams become instruments for teaching and learning, generating new meanings about the present and its reverberations. In this sense, dreams are a resource to create a dialogue between us. Dreams bring us closer to a level of intimacy that is hidden in plain sight. Dreams are the threshold that allow us to access another space and time of knowledge. Dreams are a dimension that expresses possibilities to recreate ourselves. It is crucial to recognize the multiple consciousness that are built when contemplating the potential of the unknown as a way of life and creation, and to reconquer, therefore, a fragmentation that has been in place for centuries and which has preyed on Earth, its people, and in various ways of making the world. It is from there that makes sense to pay attention to the teachings that dream provides when understood as a research and projection tool for a common future. I like to imagine what would happen if there were space to work on the relationship between dreams and learning in a school context, or basic and upper secondary school. Imagine the implementation of a workshop that assumes dream activity as an elementary component in the process of knowledge generation, building on the poetical of Oneiric activity to expand the way in which teaching and learning experience occur. Imagine future generations sensitized to listening carefully to their dreams and projecting themselves into a shared reality. These plants that accompany us come from the dreams of wise women and practitioners of traditional medicine and the time of dreams. Each one of them refers to a colonial codex, el Códice de la Cruz Badiano, the oldest botanical document in America. During the last 2 years, we have analyzed this fascinating record and incorporated new plants that were not initially contemplated in the original codex, as well as healing plants that appear in dreams. The space in which they are presented is the same one where the original codex was made in 1553. Nowadays, it's a building of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. And with this project, now we have their space of gathering and listening to each other's dreams. We also made a poem inspired from the plants that appear in the dreams of Eugenia de Jesus Lopez, my midwife teacher, and a tricky midwife. Also from the other women from the tricky community. Sorry. Now I would like to share with you a fragment of the poem. When this place is not used for gathering, you can hear this. Just a short fragment. Hamid, please.
Ya kotoa. Yara ne ganesma. Ya vayas ne shemanes nudin davashtava. Rik angui ruita tangamas riang tabihuia. Tako chon si ne nito yayoa. No yas raybe kanoni ya chimaras rubi gache tangamas ya tuve huia ini nani kera rian nyang ondage edus na.
Thank you, Hamid. The ideas presented here today originate from collective effort. In this way, I would like to provide some ideas and exercises so that the attending public can practice, public here and the public online. I had the opportunity to put these exercises into practice with a group of collaborators. So I want to give credit and thanks. Amelia Ramos, Cassandra Reyes, Adrián Gama, Sofía Steinbort, my mentor and teacher, José Miguel González Casanova, and Eugenia de Jesus Lopez, all the women in the tricky community in San Juan Copala and in Mexico City. These exercises have been adjusted and refined from our shared dreaming experience. Home. All the people living in a house choose a time to wake up during night. When they are awake, they will go to the kitchen to talk about what they were dreaming while they drink a glass of water. Repeat this action as long as you live in that place. Reflection. Tell your most recent dream to a friend or a family member and ask them to transcribe it. Read this transcription before going to bed. Collaboration. Write down all the things you would like to dream and ask someone else to dream it for you. Follow a voice. Meet as a group to sing in a dream. Before going to sleep, choose an intonation to emit with your voice. It will extend during your sleep and until you wake up. Describe the sounds that you perceive in your dreams. Meeting. Ask several people if they have dreamt of you and ask them to describe you in their dreams. Transcribe them. Daily Act 1. Find out the dream of a stranger every day. Collect dreams in your building, neighborhood, school, or office. Do this for 1 year. Daily Act 2. Know a dream of the same person every day while you live together. Gift. From a dream, make a present to the people that you share your home with, your workplace, the neighborhood where you live, the city where you reside, the local politicians in your community. Dedication. During the day, write down the poems that the non-human beings who accompany you at home will compose. What will the oldest tree in your neighborhood tell you? Which poems would spiders dedicate to the moon? Moon planting. On a full moon night, plant a question near a tree to which you will first ask for permission. Tell it to share an answer with you in dreams. Water it. When you receive an answer, find another question and return to the same tree to repeat the procedure. Collaboration. Already read that. Friendship. Try to invoke an animal, vegetable, or mineral speech in your dream. Dreamer. For 24 hours, act if you were in a dream. Find ways to communicate with what you want. Avoid the usual means of expression as much as possible. Instead, try to use all possible nonverbal communication resources, from drawing to body expressions. Flight. Find out which migratory birds cross the region where you live. Try to find them in a dream. Generational dream. Ask the oldest person in your family about a revealing dream they had. Register the most significant sensations described by the dreamer. See what your dreams tell you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And the Oneiric assembly will unfold, and it's gathering the Van Eyck participants, who I thank for joining us today, the Van Eyck staff, and some of the members and researchers and scientists from the Urban Future Studios who will present later on. But now I'd like to introduce you all to our next speaker, Dr. Sidarta Ribeiro, who I could talk hours about, but instead I'll just read a short bio. So Sidarta Ribeiro, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. Sidarta is a professor of neurosciences at the Brain Institute of the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte in Brazil. Sidarta has a vast experience in neuroethology, molecular neurobiology, and systems neurophysiology, with an interest in topics such as memory, sleep and dreams, symbolic competence in non-human animals, psychedelics, and drug policy, among many others. He's the author of 5 books, among them The Oracle of the Night, that we have here at Van Eyck. Sidarta, I promised I would just read one line of your bio, but all those complicated words were such a good challenge for me. I could not say no. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Thanks, Daniel, for the amazing series of exercises proposed. And good evening, everyone at the auditorium or those that are following on YouTube and other venues. It's really a pleasure to be with you tonight. Let me see if I can share my screen here effectively. Does this work?
Yes, we can see it.
Let me just expand this a bit. Okay. So I want to join this conversation, join the assembly, and in coming from the point of view of a biologist towards culture, towards the humanities, towards a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. And I will propose to you a path that goes talking about sleep and dreaming, tries to reconstitute our trajectory in terms of evolution. And of course, this is a conjecture, so we will basically link some ideas together. Now we need to remember that evolution builds layers. So if we are to understand what sleep and dream are to humans now, we need to understand what dream and sleep were to animals that are quite different from us, but nevertheless, we have some sort of commonality. We have the backbone of common evolution up to a point. So we can begin this journey, for example, by going back in time 4 billion years ago at the beginning of life on Earth. And right at the very beginning, already there was day and night. There was the alternation of light and darkness provoked by the rotation of Earth around its own axis. So this pressure, this selective pressure has been so strong throughout the evolution of life. And this means that pretty much every living form in the planet has some sort of has internalized this alternation of day and night. So you'll find circadian rhythms all over across different species. And it's very hard to find organisms that are not influenced by the day and night cycle. Because even those that are away from light will receive sediment, for example, that has to do with the alternation of light. Now, we would have to wait a long time until we have the first multicellular organisms. So 580 million years ago, approximately, the ancestors of jellyfish were beginning to evolve. And if we look into detail, we'll see that there's some amazing commonality. So there are neurotransmitters that we have in our brains that we use, for example, to have this conversation here, such as glutamate or GABA or glycine or dopamine or serotonin or noradrenaline. You know, it can keep going on. And we'll find pretty much the same neurotransmitters in these very simple animals. We'll also find that they can do chemotaxis. They can avoid stuff that is poisonous, for example, or they can approach food. So in that sense, we're very similar to them because we need to avoid what is damaging, and we have to pursue what is nutritious. And these sort of positive and negative responses to the environment are something. These are things that are very old, and they have been established at very beginning of the evolution of animals. Now we'll find in these very simple animals that exist nowadays the basis of what we call quiet sleep, or in the case of humans, slow wave sleep, which dominates the first half of the night. And this is the non-dreaming sleep, or the sleep with less dreaming. Sometimes you will find dreaming in slow wave sleep as well. And quiet sleep as a means to conserve energy and to replenish molecules to basically heal the body from the waking stress, from the fatigue and the wear of staying awake. This is something that you find pretty much in all animals. Now, some time passes, and 400 million years ago, insects begin to evolve, and they seem to already have something that we call active sleep. So it's a form of sleep in which the animal is offline, all right, disconnected from the outer world, but the nervous system is very active. It's very similar in concept, but we don't know if it's similar in terms of actual shared evolution to what we call REM, rapid eye movement sleep, the period of the night when we dream a lot and our brains are super active. Not all parts of the brain, but most of it. You will find active sleep also in the octopus. This is work done in my own laboratory, published last year. We showed that the octopus, as well as other cephalopods, have an active form of sleep that will show up every half an hour for about a minute. And during this sleep state, the skin will change color very fast. The texture will change. The eyes will move around, but the animals are not responsive to stimulation. They are actually sleeping. They're attentive to what's going on inside their system and not outside. So active sleep is something that evolved perhaps independently across different species and groups of animals.
And then you'll find it very well developed as REM sleep, and not just REM sleep, but very long REM sleep that can be sustained for 40 minutes, 50 minutes, up to an hour in mammals. So mammals began to evolve 220 million years ago, and they're characterized not just by having long REM sleep, and therefore a powerful capacity for dreaming, but we'll see that REM sleep and dreaming are not exactly the same thing, but they also have a very developed capacity for playing, for simulating things that do not really exist, but not just while asleep, also while awake, what you could call daydream. If we look into how our early ancestors were in the mammalian lineage, we'll see that for a long period of time, throughout most of their evolution, they were constrained in a very narrow ecological niche. So these were animals that resembled small rodents that occupied a specific part of the forest, that ate very specific kinds of food items, and they didn't really have much space to radiate, to evolve into different species and with a variety of morphologies, because the world was dominated by dinosaurs. There were dinosaurs all over throughout this entire period, and then accident, chance, benefited mammals and created the opportunity for radiation. Right, 60 million years ago in Yucatan, a huge asteroid hit right in between the sea and the land, and this provoked a sequence of events that ended up killing every animal bigger than or heavier than 30 kilos. This led to the extinction of dinosaurs, with the exception of birds, who were the remnants of dinosaurs on Earth. And it allowed small animals like mammals at the time to become the new conquerors of the planet. And so these early mammals, after the extinction of dinosaurs, they likely were those that began to evolve what I like to call the probabilistic oracle. So dreams as a reactivation of memories that somehow simulates the future. So based on yesterday, how is tomorrow supposed to be? This sort of mental operation, which I describe in detail in my book, is probably something that began to evolve before the extinction of dinosaurs, but only really gave a strong competitive edge to our ancestors after this extinction. And this oracle is therefore a biological process, not a deterministic oracle that can predict the future, because this would violate the laws of physics as we know them now. Maybe they will change in the future, right? Because physics is evolving. But for the moment, it's more parsimonious to think that this notion of dreams as oracles, of precognitive dreams, must be related to a simulation of possible scenarios, a probabilistic comparison of counterfactuals, if you wish. And this may not be so difficult to do when your main problems are sort of limited. So every day, these animals need to eat, they need not to be eaten, and eventually find mates and try to have an offspring. These are the three Darwinian imperatives that guide the evolution of animals in general. And most likely our mammalian ancestors gained a competitive edge because of the precognitive probabilistic nature of dreams. Of course, then we jump, forward in time, and we see that there's a moment of a revolution in our human lineage between, say, 500,000 years ago and 25,000 years ago. We had the amazing development of tools, and then tools of tools, and then tools of tools of tools, in a recursive process that is very, very powerful. And this led to the control of fire. This led eventually to the development of ritual burials, rock paintings, and eventually the domestication of dogs, which was the first domestication to happen, and then led to a series of domestications. I won't go into detail on this, but I want to say that if we had to imagine a moment for the transition into dream sharing, maybe we can set this around 300,000 years ago, when the earliest, when we have the earliest evidence of Homo sapiens in Africa. But probably before that, in Homo erectus and other hominids, we started to have, our ancestors started to have the ability not just to dream, which is something that probably every mammal can do, and even beyond mammals, but to actually share dreams. And sharing dreams is very different from just having dreams, because then you can transform those images into collective action. And this is just a fun cartoon stating that, you know, if our ancestors were happy with the way that their reality was, we would still be living in caves. So dreams are often equated with desire, and we'll see why in a few moments. But it has to do with desire of changing the world, right? So you dream because you want to change the future, because you want to create a new reality. And our ancestors surely did that, and it's very, I think it's very reasonable to argue that most of the innovation that came throughout the Paleolithic must have come from dreams. It probably didn't come from the waking life when our ancestors were very busy or very afraid or very reactive or trying to hunt, but rather when they were daydreaming or night dreaming and relaxing and imagining what's not yet there. So what really sets us apart from other animals at this point is our ability to have those night and day dreams, share them with our family members or clan members, and also to navigate in time. Many mammals, you know, pets that we have at home, they have an ability to expect things in the future, and they can also remember things in the past, but they cannot count time. So we created the possibility of counting time, but also to being able to move in time. So you can now close your eyes and imagine what you're going to do 2 days from now, or you can close your eyes and imagine and remember what happened 10 years ago. And this ability to go back and forth in time is something that really sets us apart from other animals, and then involves, it's very important for narratives to be developed. This is all, we need to contextualize that this is happening in a context of the development of what we call patriarchy, that has a competition ethics, right? So this is the ethics of violence, of exclusion, oppression, avarice, dominance, revenge. It's the ethics of competition in the natural world, the ethics of the perspective predator versus prey, and very strong in our lineage. But we also evolved in a different axis of ethics, which is that related to matriarchy, right? That has to do with attention, responsibility, communication, responsiveness, competence, trust, respect, solidarity, plurality. We cannot imagine that our ancestors would have survived all this time under very harsh conditions without a very strong ethics of care, right? There's evidence of this. For example, evidence that people would break their bones, and bones would be healed, and people would survive those lesions for years, even 36 to 38,000 years ago. This was already possible, and this is completely unique to humans. Other animals, when they break a leg, they're pretty much condemned. There's nothing other individuals can do to help an individual that breaks the leg. But in humans, this is not so, because there's a very strong ethics of care. Now, I want you to take a minute to imagine the experience of our ancestors in the Paleolithic when they had dreams about people that were either alive or dead. Imagine that we're a group of Homo sapiens or Homo neanderthalensis, and we are a clan. And then one of us comes in the morning and says, I had a dream with our dead grandmother, and she told us to do such and such to prevent an attack from our neighboring clan. Would we take it lightly? Would we think it's probably explained by some property of our bodies, which is what we believe now, that it's related to REM sleep and the brain and this and that? Most surely not. Most surely this was taken as evidence, as actually very positive evidence for the life of that dead ancestor, that grandmother still alive, should be alive in some other realm, in some other plane of existence. And most likely this is the beginning of religion. This is the beginning of the belief into spirits, into a different world that is always there, and that allowed our ancestors to accumulate a lot of knowledge. So we have to think that the accumulation of knowledge of the Paleolithic and the Neolithic and so on was very, very embodied. It was knowledge that was depending on the bodies of other people. So if you wanted to know how to hunt mammoth, you needed to watch and participate in mammoth hunt with your elders. And when people died, it was really a disaster, because it was the death of a person that people loved, but also the death of an encyclopedia. So those dreams were and still are cherished, very much cherished and sought, actually, by most contemporary hunter-gatherer groups. And the evidence that this led to a cult of the dead is all over the world. You will find mounds, burial mounds, and all sorts of tombs. And actually, if we think of the pyramids, it's a tomb that you can see from out of the planet. And this is basically scattered throughout the world. So it's really about how the minds of humans evolved, and how important it was to have dreams with dead ancestors that kept bringing novel stuff, kept adding to culture. So we have then to consider that the Paleolithic mind was built, let's say the software, the human software was built on a hardware that was already, completed 300,000 years ago, but the software kept evolving, the culture kept evolving faster and faster through narratives of actions of living or dead creatures, human or animals. And this led to the belief in spirits. This is an argument that was made by Durkheim, made by Nietzsche, and it's something that is very reasonable to assume that the first gods, the proto-gods, were actually dead ancestors mixed with animals. There's plenty of evidence of that. Now, if we think in terms of what's going on in the brain, when you're talking about other people or imagining other people, imagining your own story, imagining things in the future or in the past, or telling, composing a narrative that you're either making up or it's related to some memories that you acquired. Whatever you do that has to do with you or others involves a group of brain regions called the default modes network that is also involved in the psychedelic experience, is also involved in meditation, and it has to do with storytelling. It has to do with narratives. It has to do with mental creatures interacting with each other. Not surprisingly, it's involved with moral reasoning. Now, the DMN, the default mode network, is essential for establishing, for representing the ego, right? The conscious representation of that the dreamer has of his or her own self. But it's also home to all the other mental creatures that we have, those that we find, that we meet in dreams, that we meet when we undergo a psychedelic experience or active imagination and many other techniques. And it really doesn't matter for the brain whether these are real characters or imagined characters. From the point of view of the brain, they are all mental creatures. And it's interesting that you can only put yourself in the other's shoes. You can only have empathy if you have these brain areas functionally active. So for us to have an ethics of care, we need to have a theory of minds. We have to imagine that other have minds as well, but we also need to be able to assume their perspective. And the DMN is essential for that. And the DMN is tremendously activated when we dream. This all resonates with Carl Jung's ideas relating to mental creatures, what he called imagos, and his relationships of learning with imagos. He would have a guru that he would meet in active imagination that helped him tremendously throughout his life. And some people think this is off the wall and not really, evidence-based, but now we know, we have been knowing it for a while now, for 20 years, from the work of, for example, Rodrigo Quiroga in Leicester University, that there are neurons in the hippocampus of us, people, humans, that respond not just to specific features of the image or some sound or some color or some contrast or orientation of an image, but rather to complex concepts related to characters. So for example, you will find neurons that really like any image of Luke Skywalker or the actor that played Luke Skywalker on camera, or the name Luke Skywalker written or even pronounced by a male or female, but will not respond to a variety of other famous characters, fictional or not. So this work points to the notion that our brains are the home of many mental creatures, and we don't know still how they are represented. We know very little about the autonomy that these creatures have in people's minds, but this allows us to have an easier dialogue with our history and even prehistory. So this ability to create representations of beings that are alive or dead, that are real or imagined, and to infer a mind for those beings, what is in psychology is technically called theory of mind. This led probably to the first version of religion, which was animism. So the notion that every part of our environment, the trees, the water, the rocks, all the animals, all the plants, everything around us has a mind. So the projection of one's mind onto all the other objects as having minds of their own gave rise to probably what was the first structure of religion, and that still persists today in many places, including Brazil, of course. And eventually this relationship evolved, and many of what's the so-called gods and goddesses in many religions are no longer just forces of nature, or no longer just ancestors, but they're actually, removed from this plane here, and they're called divine entities that have less of a stake here on our small little matters, but still they can have, right, in those religions. And this leads to very complicated, sophisticated concepts already in the Bronze Age. So, for example, the notion in Hinduism that Vishnu dreams the universe into reality. This notion is actually quite similar to some notions that people have now in physics, in trying to imagine that this world may be actually a simulation of multiple universes, of multiverses. When we go into on the fringes of physics and mathematics, we'll find some concepts which dialogue well with those early concepts from the Bronze Age, for example, in Hinduism. Now, between 9,000 and 2,000 and 2,500 years before Christ, there's a huge, an explosive accumulation of culture, right? With the beginning of the first temples, agriculture, cities and empires, moralizing gods that rather than supporting the desires of people, actually told them to refrain from satisfying their desires. So you could think of them as the superego gods, trade and money, and then writing. And as soon as writing was invented about 5,000 years ago, there is already the reports, the narrative of dream as premonitory omen, as some sort of precognitive narrative that can tell what's going to happen in the future, but also something that might be prevented if acts are taken in a certain direction. So one of the earliest dreams recorded is already at the very beginning of written texts, is the dream of Dumuzid, which is basically a nightmare of being attacked by strangers, and it's a prophecy that he tries to avoid desperately, but he ends up being captured and killed. So nightmares are very likely the earliest dreams that were available for the written record. And there's plenty of premonitory dreams all over our history. The Bible has many of them, the famous ones by the dreams by the Pharaoh that couldn't be interpreted by his own sages, and then he asks for a Hebrew, a slave, Joseph, to interpret those dreams, and they were interpreted in terms of the scarcity that was going on, and in terms of the need to stock grain. And there's a lot on pretty much all religions accept dreams as source of divine revelation. But not only in religion, this is also has a major impact in the business world. For example, the famous dream by Elias Howe. He was looking, like many people in the mid 1800s, for an automatic sewing machine. All the sewing was done by hand. And then he had this dream in which he was captured by a savage king who ordered him to create this machine in 24 hours. And he struggled very hard. He couldn't really come up with a solution. And right before being executed, he noticed that the warriors the savage warriors were moving their spears up and down, and the heads of the spears were pierced. And then he woke up and had the idea of having a needle with the eye at the point. And within a few hours, he already had a working prototype of the lock stitch sewing machine, which made a revolution in terms of economics and in terms of social impact around the world. You can think of the PCR. The PCR was attributed to a psychedelic experience, and this gave a Nobel Prize. And now we have a PCR machine in pretty much every medium-sized city in the world, and it's very important now, for example, in terms of the pandemics. And it came from a psychedelic experience, which to a large extent is akin to a dream experience. Think of the impact of dreams in the arts. I mentioned here Dürer, but perhaps most importantly, the technique created by Salvador Dali to doze and then let a heavy spoon fall on the ground and then wake up and paint based on the dreams that he would have. You have, for example, this painting called The Dream Caused by the Flight of a Bee Around the Pomegranate 1 second before waking. So it's almost like a description of an objective method to obtain a very subjective image. And in science, there's plenty of evidence that dreams have been helping, informing, and advancing the progress. The famous dream by Auguste Kekulé, he attributed his discovery of the circular structure of benzene to dreaming with a very old magical symbol, the Ouroboros, the snake that bites its own tail. The very important example of the discovery of the periodic table by Dmitry Mendeleev. I believe everybody watching this talk right now at some point had to memorize at least some parts of the periodic table. This is something that really changed society in a deep manner. The dream that Otto Loewi had that led him to the discovery of the role of acetylcholine in the control of cardiac rate, and he got a Nobel Prize for this discovery. There are many examples of that. But why is that possible? How is it that dreams can really provide these kinds of solutions to problems? And I think that it's only fair to go back to Freud on this. So Freud, in the interpretation of dreams, proposed many important ideas, and I select 3 here for us to try to dissect. 1, that dreams contain day residues, that they reflect what happens during waking. 2, that dreams are driven by desires. And 3, that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. I'll show you some results and some ideas, and then we'll try to go back to those statements and see if we can give them a contemporary reading or translation. So Freud didn't say that learning is helped by sleep, but when he said that we have a day residue in dreaming, it's almost like saying that. Why? Because if there is a day residue in our dreams, and if we learn during the day, then we are also learning during dreams. This is sort of like a corollarium of his postulate. He didn't go on to measure that. This was the first time this was measured was in 1924 in this experiment done in the United States, in which Jenkins and Allenbach, they measured the number of syllables that people would retain over time, like syllables that did not exist in English, that people had to learn for the experiment. And you clearly see that the people that were allowed to sleep had a much better retainment of those new syllables than the people that stayed awake. And this was done with the same subjects. This experiment has been done, many, many times since then. And nowadays there's plenty of evidence that sleep is tremendously important for remembering, for forgetting, for restructuring memories, for creativity, and many other things. The evidence for dreaming is coming along. I will show some of that. This is an example of a study that shows that people that have time in REM sleep become more able to come up with distant associations, with remote associations. So they can come up with less likely memory associations. They become more creative to some degree. And in 2010, there was the first publication of a scientific study showing that when you dream of solving a task, you become better at solving the task. In this particular example, the task was navigating a maze, a virtual maze. This is work done by Erin Walmsley in the laboratory of Bob Stickle in Harvard. And after people navigated, they allowed them to either go to sleep or stay awake. And once people after some period of time passed, they asked people, did you dream about the maze, yes or no? And the people that stayed awake were also sorted in terms of, did they think about the maze, yes or no? And as you can see here on the right, for the people that stayed awake, it didn't matter whether they thought about the maze or not, whether they thought about the task or not. They didn't improve much. But for the people that went to sleep, it mattered a lot. Those that went to sleep and did not dream about the maze, not much improvement was seen. But for the people that went to sleep and dreamt about the maze, they really got better, like even 5 minutes better in terms of finding the end of the maze. So a major improvement. Oops, something is happening. Okay. Now, what is the basis of this? Why are we so much better at doing things after sleeping and dreaming? One basic biological reason is the fact that sleep promotes brain detoxification. So here you have an experiment in which some colored dye was placed on top of the mouse head, and then when the animal is awake, it doesn't go anywhere. The dye stays in the same place here in yellow. As you can see here, this is like a cube of cerebral cortex, and you can see here some blood vessels. But what the dye here during wake is just concentrated exactly where it was, where the experimenters put it. But when the animal goes to sleep, this dye diffuses through the tissue. So it basically clears up and it's washed away. The brain is constantly circulating liquid, and this liquid takes away toxins, and for example takes away beta amyloid proteins, which eventually down the road can cause Alzheimer's disease. So this basic research result actually begins to explain why people that sleep little or have bad sleep or fragmented sleep are at risk for Alzheimer's disease many years later. So when you feel like if you didn't sleep properly, you feel like you're drunk, it's actually true. You're intoxicated. You're intoxicated by substances that the brain produces and that it needs to clear before it's able to learn again and to do things that are productive. Now, there are other reasons why sleep and dreaming are important for memories. So one important thing is the notion of day residue, that's something that we can actually measure. So Freud said that we dream of things that happen during the day, fine, but can we actually measure that? The first time it was measured objectively from the point of view of a neuron was by Pavlidis and Winson in '89. They were recording in neurons in the rat, and they studied neurons that were either active or inactive during the day, during the waking period. And what they found is that the neurons that were most active during waking were also reactivated during sleep, during both slow wave sleep and REM sleep. This was the first electrical day residue, the first, let's say, objective corroboration of the Freudian postulate. A few years later, also at the same university, at the Rockefeller University, working with Konstantin Pavlidis, I published the first evidence that this also happens at the level of molecules, of genes. What you see here is expression of a gene related to memory consolidation, to the long-lasting storage of memories. And in animals that are in a familiar environment that is very boring, they begin in waking with very strong expression in the cortex and hippocampus. These are hemispheres of rat brains, but this expression becomes less and less like blue and black, no longer yellow and red, as the animals go into slow sleep and REM sleep. However, when the animals go through something novel, through some sort of like rat park, they have a decrease from waking to slow wave, but then they have an increase from slow wave to REM sleep. So there's a reinduction of this gene expression, and this is like a molecular day residue, a Freudian day residue at the genetic level that has to do with memory formation. And I could give you many more examples of that. There's plenty now in the past 10 years or so. Now let's recap a little bit. If we understand memories as something that changed the brain, change the brain electrically, and then change the brain molecularly, change the way the neurons express genes and produce proteins. Can we make a visual metaphor of the development of the brain? So imagine that this is a visual metaphor of the brain of a newborn. When a newborn comes to the world, it has very little knowledge about the world. It has some phylogenetic knowledge, right? It has some inheritance behaviors that were inherited from his ancestry. They have to do with crying, feeding, sleeping, moving, learning, right? But that's it. And then as these behaviors get to interact with the world, the baby learns. And as the baby learns, the brain gets to be changed. And basically all those neurons that are connected, they have to be, the connections need to be strengthened or weakened. And then over time, imagine now that this baby lived 90 years. And now we're talking about a very old person, and the brain is going to look metaphorically like this. So now it's no longer a very flat and pliable surface, but actually a very hard, resistant surface that has been carved by experience, in which the deep rivers correspond to the strong memories and the shallow rivers correspond to the weak memories. Now imagine that the person is this elder person, 90 years of age, after accumulating all this information, which is stored in this structure, in the topography of the mind. Now imagine that this person will go to sleep. And when a person goes to sleep, some electrical activity is generated inside the brain. And we can think of this as the rain on top of the Grand Canyon. And now when the water hits the rock, it will flow, but it will flow according to the history of the rock. So basically the electrical activity generated inside the brain during sleep will follow the topography of experiences. So a person that, for example, is in Kiev right now and is under bombardment and is experiencing a very traumatic events, a series of events, will form memories. And every time the person closes the eyes and relaxes, the electrical activity inside the brain will tend to go to those paths. So the person will develop a hallmark of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the repetitive nightmare. Now, I talked a lot about genes and proteins and neurons, but all that is going on without really generating conscious experience. So can we reduce dreaming to REM sleep? Do we need to talk about dreams at all, or can we just talk about REM sleep and neurons and biology? Can we get done with psychology? No, we cannot. Not at all. It has been shown by Mark Solms, for example, an important neurologist and psychoanalyst, that there are some people that have some specific brain lesions that abolish dreaming but spare REM sleep, which means people, they have REM sleep all right, but if you wake them up in the middle of REM sleep, they will report no visual experience. They will say they're in a dark experience, in an experience with no images. And the kind of brain lesions that can lead to that are brain lesions that affect the so-called reward circuits. So those are parts of the nervous system that have to do with the expectation of reward or the expectation of non-reward, of punishment. And these are mediated by dopamine. So you can think of dopamine as a neurotransmitter, neurochemical, very old, that existed back then in jellyfish, but that has to do with desires and to the pursuit of goals that leads to the satisfaction of desires. So in a very concrete manner, if somebody cannot desire, if a person has a lesion to a brain circuit that allows for desire to occur, this person cannot dream. This person will have REM sleep, but not dreams. So dreams are not just the reactivation of memories, but the reactivation and recombination of memories towards the accomplishment of certain goals, towards the satisfaction of some wishes or desires. I want to wrap up. And I want to take a minute to talk about some research that we have in the laboratory related to schizophrenia. Now, psychotic symptoms, when people have hallucinations and deliria that that are, let's say, that set them apart from the waking reality of other people. This can be caused by a variety of different conditions. So schizophrenia can lead to that. Bipolar disorder in the manic phase can lead to that. Epilepsy can lead to that if it's in the temporal lobe, and psychedelics can lead to that. So one important thing is to be able to set apart those different sources of psychosis, and this is important for treatment, of course. And one thing that we have shown in the laboratory in the past 15 years or so is that if you ask a psychotic patient about their waking life, they will produce narratives. Here, every red circle is a word, and the lines connecting them represents the consecutive sequence of words in a discourse. So if you ask a patient with schizophrenia, how was your day yesterday? They will give you a certain account that tends to be chronological. It has some loops, as you can see down here, but it's not very different from the control, from a healthy control. You cannot tell apart the person with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder from the person that is doesn't have those conditions. But if you ask them about a dream, if you say, can you tell me your most recent dream? This will set apart those groups very well. You'll see the person with schizophrenia very laconic, with a very poor structure, and the person with bipolar disorder with a very rich structure. So in fact, if you want to know, if you want to gain insight into the psychiatric condition of the patients in this study and many others that we published, you will need to request for a dream report. So dream reports are particularly useful to understand the structure of the mind of the person that is answering, let's say, a series of psychiatric questionnaires. This is something that is not something that psychiatry wanted to hear, because Freud had been ditched and forgotten for a long time. But I would say this is one of the many lines of evidence that are bringing Freud and Jung back into neuroscience big time. So I want to go back to those statements that we had before. When Freud said that dreams contain day residues, we can easily agree that dreams reactivate memories at the electrical and molecular levels. When we think of the notion that dreams are driven by desires, it's clear that dreams reactivate memories so as to simulate expectations of reward and punishment that are mediated by dopamine. And when he said that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, maybe we can say that dreams grant access to the memory database and its endless recombination, promoting creativity and revealing the structure of the dreamer's mind. Now I want to come to a conclusion, and by becoming a little bit more political. We know that with the invasion of the night by electric light, then radio, then TV, then the internet, this has really worsened the quality and the quantity of sleep and dreaming. And there are many studies showing that. Now, it's obvious that this will harm, and that this is harming our physiological health and our imaginal health, our ability to imagine futures. We know for a fact that lack of sleep causes several health problems, such as learning disorders, impaired emotional regulation, stress, depression, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, and down the road, Alzheimer's disease. There's plenty of evidence for that. Also note that there's a big problem with suicide in the world. There's more people dying from suicide every year than the number of homicides. And it's one of the leading causes of death for young people. There's also a clear problem with depression. In many countries, 2 to 6% of the population are depressed, and not necessarily poor countries. In many wealthy countries, this is happening as well. So we have a problem in terms of how people live their lives and expect to be in contact with sources of joy, right? We also know there's a poverty and hunger problem in the world. These are data from 2015, so it's much worse now for sure. But in 2015, every minute, 21 children under 5 died in the world because of poverty. So this is a major crisis in the world. Now we have the pandemic. This is data from yesterday. You can see here, this is the entire curve for COVID-19 cases. We can see that we just passed the worst bump, but now it's beginning to go up again. So we don't know where this is going. This is the curve for confirmed deaths. You can see that we had multiple peaks, and the most recent one was pretty high. Of course, we have conflicts all over the world, from the center of Congo to Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and as you well know, the Amazon and many other biomes are in danger in the world. The Amazon in particular is burning. It's really approaching the tipping point, the point of no return, beyond which there's not going to be a way to prevent the forests to become a desert. And I need to quote here Shaman Daviko Penawa from the Yanomami people in his amazing book, The Falling Sky, Words of a Yanomami Shaman, when he says, white people don't dream as far as we do. They sleep a lot, but only dream about themselves. So what is going on? What is the problem? Why so many crises? And here comes this notion that we are living an amazing, a terrible paradox. Because despite of all the advancement of science and all the accumulation of capital, most people feel like there's no future for them. The future is bleak. We know for a fact, we know there's thousands of scientific papers showing that sleep and dreaming are essential for maintaining good health, and they have major impact on cognition and emotion. Dreaming and empathy and emotion and social intelligence are closely linked. Now, the lack of empathy that is brewing so awfully across cultural boundaries, this may be related to our poor sleeping and our worse dreaming. So maybe this feeling that people are so angry with each other and so reactive has to do with what we did to our sleep and to our dreaming in the past, since the Industrial Revolution, pretty much. Could we be stuck in some sort of delusional insomnia? I mean, why is it that we have so many technological means to change the world and so little hope in doing that? And I want to conclude by saying that we need to relearn how to sleep well, how to remember our dreams. We need to rediscover how to tell them to the people that we love and respect. We need to remember how to listen attentively to their dreams. So we need to be able to share, to tell dreams, but also to listen to dreams and try to come to conclusions that are collective, that have to do with the common good. If we relearn how to properly dream and share dreams, this will create bridges of empathy across cultural boundaries. And if we do that, we will certainly honor our ancestors and as well as our descendants. Everybody that has children, that has grandchildren, we really need to fix this before they come of age, because we may, if we don't solve these problems now, they may be unsolvable in one or two generations. And finally, I want to say that to dream a future of common good is really the quest that we have for the generations now alive. Everybody in this planet is a neighbor of ours, and these differences that we have, they enrich us. And this is a dream worth sharing. If we're able to rescue the art of dreaming and integrate it with contemporary, with current scientific knowledge, we may be on to an amazing moment in our species in which there is common good, in which all the different forms of living can exist in peace. And this may be really close within grasp if we only are able to come to our senses, come back to our senses, and somehow escape this delusional insomnia that we are currently in. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Sidarta, for that full breath overview. Thank you. That was amazing. Sidarta, you can have a little bit of rest now. You'll join us for the Q&A after the third and final presentation. And I just want to invite everyone here to start thinking of questions and comments you want to bring to the conversation, but also everyone online who's following on Zoom or YouTube or Vimeo, just send them along. So now I'd like to give the floor to Jesse Hoffman from the Urban Future Studios, who will explain a bit more of their work over there and talk about this alternative techniques of futuring. So Jesse, please, you could take this.
Thank you, Bruno. Just checking if this technically works. I don't see my slides up yet. Yeah. So first, thanks Bruno for allowing me in this conversation. It's an urgency intensive, 3 presentations. That's what you have to process tonight. We were here with colleagues from Utrecht, Lisette van Beek and Timothy Stacey still here, and other colleagues were here as well. And we actually had this afternoon, perhaps what can be called like an urgency slowdown to sort of get to know the people at the Jan van Eyck and Bruno, Hisham, and others, and also Danielle. Thank you very much for your nice welcome. It was really nice. But tonight it is about the intensity part, but also the urgency part. And I think for people that had in the past weeks with everything going on, the emotional capacity and the intellectual energy to read the IPCC report, there was a lot of to worry about. And that's actually what we are working on at the Urban Future Studio in Utrecht University as well, where I work as an assistant professor, where we try to sort of reach out to away from academia to see what we can contribute as scientists to addressing problems. And I think that's something that this event is part of from the Jan van Eyck. It's also an attempt to sort of bridge from the arts to the rest of society. But then, as you can see here in this picture, being located at a science park, literally outside of the city, so that's very difficult. And in a science environment where we talk in models, where we talk about CO2, like 90% of society has no clue what it is about, or perhaps even more. And our take on that is that we should better think about how, as a society, we actively engage with the future and images of the future. And I will have one quote here that I also read, and that's what we call futuring. So that's our object of study. And that's what we call attempts at shaping the space of action for identifying and circulating images of the future. So that's the first part. So we're interested in images of the future, but not just for the sake of them being out there, but how they actively shape our actions in the present. And then also that's a process by which a relationship between past, present, and future is enacted. So just to give an example from way back, which we kind of know perhaps all by our different trainings, the work of Le Corbusier, who I think this is an image what was presented for Paris, I think 18 towers, which for the first time really presented the idea of the modern city, functionally with different areas for living and etc., for working and consuming. And this was never realized. But this kind of image, for the first time, it really, like, for cities, architects, policymakers around the world, really captured the imagination. So it became part of a world exhibition. It became part of books on utopias for social democracy so they really defined what people consider to be the good life, and how you enjoy, where you fall in love, how you are with your children, what you think of as social growth. So it's really these images of the future that are about, like, what do we dream to be? I won't speak about dreaming otherwise. To be as a society, what we think as valuable, to then really build a coalition and shape our present. So we're often thinking about criticizing what's going on in the world, but this is really this is a domain of politics. And as we can see here as well, so in the Netherlands, how much this has changed the world, right? This is the Bijlmer in Amsterdam. It is also very much about how we think about the future and the past and the present in one. So it's Le Corbusier, which has really clearly anti-democratic and some would even say fascistic tendencies. So modern town planning comes to with a new type of architecture and then saying that this includes burning our bridges and break with the past. So it's very much about how we relate through time. When you're interested in futuring, you can look at these architects, but you can also look at activists and how they circulate alternative images of the future. You can look at a company like Google that tries to sell us a self-driving car here with, like, in a very comfortable environment, as if it's already right there in front of us and we only have to pay for it. So this is a space of power, but also of possibility. And we, I think at the Urban Future Studio, are very interested in how these images are collectively performed. And then we use the language of theater. So we talk about how images are part of performances. How does performance have a certain dramaturgy? How does it include speech, a form of staging, a way of scripting events? How publics and audiences are created around the way we imagine the future, and how there are front stage, backstage, and there's a setting, artifacts. So very much about using the language of theater to think about how our way of futuring is performed in society. Talking about dramaturgy of change and dramaturgy of futuring, the typical one is, I think what we all know when we talk about the IPCC reports and where it is performed is the COP26. This was the fall where we see Boris Johnson. So these are the typical performances, big theater, where the big national players come together, often men. Boris Johnson, who just said right at the start, here in this coming 2 weeks, really something needs to happen. So it's very much about heroes. It's about Alok Sharma, who's putting his paper here, as you see, bringing them together, showing his agency. There's the Prime Minister from the Netherlands that had to navigate critique and also came up to the podium to present his big vision. This is really the dramaturgy of the big male leaders in the world, where there's this kind of giant heroism towards saving the world in the coming 10 years. It's also the world of abstract images again, of the image models, the quantitative facts. It is where our big celebrities go to, for one last time, tell the world that it's now really time to save the world. And it doesn't really work, as the same artist, actor, Leonardo DiCaprio, showed in the movie, which kind of made fun of his own way of going about it. So I think what is really clear from that is that those kinds of dramaturgies are just not working. It's COP26, they already exist for a really long time, and they don't really bring the kind of action, they don't kind of trigger us into a direction that we really want. So what are the dramaturgies that we need? And there I will talk a little bit about what we've been doing in Leeuwarden, which is a city up in the north, and on an exhibition called Places of Hope. But before I go there, I'll take a small detour. And it's important that this is Leeuwarden in the north of the Netherlands, which was in 2018 a cultural capital, which is often you have to cities become, for example, a capital for the Olympic Games, and then all kinds of commercial interest use that as a festivity. But the cultural capital is usually actually an interesting moment for a city to really rethink its future, and different sort of groups from society, also bottom up very much, uses as an opportunity for a public debate and staging very interesting events. And then it was also here very much about this little bird, the grutto, the godwit, which during this cultural year became a big icon. So this is a bird that people who live there really know from their landscape. This is a bird that is also endangered. But through artists and like a coalition of artists, activists, and farmers, it was really put out there as an icon for what is at stake. So compare this to what I've just said about how it's performed in Glasgow and what kind of different symbols this already implies. And it was presented as the king of the meadows, the godwit. The king of the meadows had a lot of different cultural did a lot of different things. They had an early morning kind of theater play where they didn't have a State of the Union, but a State of the Ground, giving voice to the grutto throughout the year. They had a really large conference of the birds in Amsterdam at the Concertgebouw, at the cultural, the classical music hall in Amsterdam. And this icon was also taken up by different villages for when they had parades. Suddenly the godwit became a symbol of the loss of biodiversity, of nature, of everything, because of the intense farming in that area. And this was also another theater play from the same coalition of people. And this became really influential and really captured the imagination, and is still an icon for the sort of these discussions in the north of the Netherlands around what to do with these really impoverished grounds because of intense agriculture and sort of new nature development. I think what is really interesting about it as well is that it reminds us perhaps of what we are here seeing of a kind of cultural politics of the 1960s. And perhaps that's also, I think, what was a lesson for me seeing this. So this is the insect cult, the Insectensekte, who didn't have the Godwit, but had the butterfly as their big icon. And they had also all kinds of theater shows and were also really influential. Whenever there was an environmental disaster, an oil leak, for example, they would put out this flag with a butterfly, and they had different shows around it to call attention for what's happening to nature, but really through the same symbolism. So I think it really has the same use of colors, and this was an exhibition in. So this says, "Mother, what's wrong with the planet?" It was at the university in Amsterdam. So I think what is interesting to me, these more radical dramaturgies, is that what they actually do is that they really expose some kind of a contradiction of the status quo, and by demonstrating that contradiction, also create a new public and spur them into action. So this is actually from them. They were called the insect cult, but they also called themselves the Expertological Laboratorium, the Deskundelogisch Lab. So if you limit yourself exclusively to problems, you fail to see the obvious. Expertologists speak in clear, the activists, in clear and plain language about simple things. Expertology is what everybody can understand, intuitively, and it's never difficult to grasp. So they, for example, painted themselves blue whenever they would go somewhere and they were at risk. They also spoke about landscape and environmental boredom. So they really were looking for words, for symbolisms that really spoke directly to a lot of different people. So where now the discourse is in CO2, a trust in numbers, it's about biodiversity and space, 10 years left for them. And I think also today it's for this alternative dramaturgy, it's about not space, but place, not biodiversity, but just plain nature. And this Godwit is really much related to the metaphor of landscape pain. So it really sort of gives emotions and feelings to what is happening. I think what is interesting, and that also reminds us of the 60s, is that this perhaps brings back thinking about a different kind of dramaturgy and different kind of tactics. So the situations that the provost used in Amsterdam, for example, where they had these happenings which were public performances, actively like public, staged, to disrupt public order. For example, by the Ugge movement to protest against the tobacco industry that had financed this statue, and every now and then they had this Ugge event where there was a smoking magician that would keep on smoking, and then at some point the police would come, and they had all of these kinds of happenings. And I think this is really interesting to see how this really is a different way of going about staging a conversation in public. Or the unitary urbanism strategy, that you really take out one symbol, whether it's the Godwit, or in this case the bike, and they had the different white plans. So there was the white bike plan, which they painted all kinds of bikes white, and they were for use for everybody. They had the white car plan, and also the white dead body plan, the white corpse plan for every person that died. They would paint the street white. So it was really an alternative way of thinking about the city. And then I think these kinds of symbols, but also this bike, for example, is such an icon that today, when I got here on an OV-fiets, a public transport bike, it really relates back to these discussions about public available bikes for the city. And then I will actually go beyond this, but then, I think if you're really interested in this sort of rethinking of new types of dramaturgy, of new things, a way of going about staging a conversation. Also, the situationists from Paris are, of course, really interesting with all kinds of strategies to walk differently and experience the city very differently. And I think why I'm saying this is just to make an analogy with that time, right? So the 60s, perhaps, this time where Le Corbusier was, in his legacy, transforming cities all around the world, feeding consumerism, individualism. You saw these kinds of responses, reconnecting with nature, disrupting, allowing people to really give ordinary people a voice, talking in plain language. I think that's really like an analogy for today, right? It's really how we can rethink from where we are right now. At the Urban Future Studio, these are some sort of ideas I think that we also take on, and one thing that we do each year is that we organize a course with students and policymakers where we have them organize a museum of the future or another form of an exhibition. So this was the Museum of the Linear Economy, which was located in 2050, and where we were actually all saying goodbye to the linear economy. So we also had the Secretary of State here at some point, and then we interviewed her on how she felt about saying goodbye in 2050 to the linear economy. And then students do these kinds of performances. Also, this involves policymakers who are part of this course. And then we use those musea. So this is in one place, but then these also travel. We use them also as a space for public debate and staging a conversation around what do we mean with moving from a linear to a circular economy. What does it mean in terms of how we build cities, of more the tangible aspects of these kinds of transformations? Also in the same course this year, we organized a walk which students and policymakers designed together, which was a walk through nature, moving from 1851 to 2151, where you would be guided by your ancestors and in conversation with them go back, first to the far past, and then go back, and then go to the future slowly, and really try to understand time and what happens in time, over 300 years. So Places of Hope. That's an exhibition that was also in Leeuwarden as part of the cultural capital. It was there for eight months, and it was really the idea to create a more positive, alternative, imaginary for the north of the Netherlands, which again used very experiential, sort of non-cognitive techniques, like you see here. I will show another image of this actually, which is more clear. We started with kind of a parade. So these were musicians from Leeuwarden, and we were, I think, with a few thousand people. We walked through Leeuwarden, and we kind of played around with the idea of a protest. So rather than having people carry a negative sign saying something that they were against something, all of the participants in the protest or the parade were having these positive signs, and like, we want to be here, and I see the stars, and places of hope, and I like wind, I love wind. And I think that was a really cool sort of, at least I thought it was cool as a practice, because it really brought young people, but also senior policymakers and activists, and like in the same parade, in the sort of walking really next to each other. That was the opening. In the basement of the exhibition, there were 5 rooms where the north of the beaches and the Wadden, I'm not entirely sure, but that's sort of the natural area in the north of the Netherlands was represented, where you could walk through and where you could actually see it becoming day and night, where you saw the moon changed from full to, not day and night, but changed from full to non-full, how you call it? Yeah, I don't know, but you understand what I mean. And people could just walk here without their shoes and really yeah, really sort of reconnect with what we're actually talking about, right? In these discussions. So the main hall at the entrance was was kind of a scenario, layers of scenarios. So you would use a glass where you would only see one scenario, either the past, the future, or the internal presence of nature, all kinds of animals. So you had these kind of small glasses with 3 different kinds of colors. You could make choices between what kind of future you would like and sticker. There was a section on neighborhoods for the future and what kind of neighborhoods we desire. And we also, in the middle of the exhibition, had some kind of a theater where we organized all kinds of debates. And in particular, what you see here, we had landscape designers develop a future scenario, but doing that together with farmers, with water managers in the region, and all kinds of other actors. And this was the final debate, which was actually really heated, because this is actually where farmers that were not part of the process, they became really angry, and they had kind of a counter act on the day of the presentation of the report. But this was part of the exhibition. So I think, just to close off and not overload you with too much tonight, I think for us it's in this context and really rethinking alternative ways of imagining the future, but also alternative dramaturgies, is where this, I think, exchange between a university and an art institute makes a lot of sense. I'm not going to say a lot about that, but I think it is just, I think, a really interesting discussion in thinking what kind of alternative dramaturgy of change we can come up with together, but also what it means in terms of art involvement. So this is, for example, from somebody I share a workplace with in Rotterdam, Arthur van Balen, who made these inflatable barricades. So I think his position as an artist is really directly in the protest, right? So you can whether you're a scientist or an artist, you can actually actively join protest movements, and then he makes these inflatable barricades and to kind of play around with power and using the same kind of tactics as the provost. But also somebody like Francis Alice, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name actually properly, but which is for me, which I'm just showing because I really like it. So these are the 500 people that in Peru have moved this mountain with, I think, about 10 centimeters, which is in the MoMA, and which is kind of an example of like it really nicely illustrates how with maximum effort you get minimal result, being a metaphor for Peruvian society. So I think there's this a much less indirect way, but again playing with art to problematize and to show what's actually going wrong in society right now. So just to close off there, I think once again, like, how do we get from facts to values? How can we in our collaborations expose the violence and the ecological crisis of today, and how to stage the absurdity of the present actually as a means of change, and what do we actually need in our collaborations, and what does it mean for the sides of politics that we look for, and is there such a thing, 21st century situationist environmental politics, and I would really be eager at some point to hear what you think is the meaningful role and integral role for the arts in doing so. So Bruno, that's my contribution here.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you also for the other members of the Urban Futures Studio present in the room. Now I want to bring Sidarta back, if you're still around, Sidarta. Hi.
Yes.
Is everyone
Yes.
still awake or dreaming already? Oh, okay, good. It was a long day, Sidarta, with the Oneiric assembly. So now we still have a bit of time for questions or comments. So feel free to just ask for the mic. I also want to give the opportunity for the speakers to ask questions to each other. But I also think we have so much to digest here that it's hard to come up with something on the spot. But I can go first if you allow me. And I want to pick up where you left it, Sidarta, in the end of your presentation, when, kind of trying to map out the relevance of dreaming and of sleeping for, as maybe at the genesis of many of our frictions in society. And it's to be remembered that you live in Brazil, and we know that under the current presidency of Jair Bolsonaro, there's a cultural war happening in Brazil, to say the least. A cultural war to science and education specifically, under which you operate, let's say, but also a total dismantling of culture, combined with a cultural and actually war on indigenous knowledges and in indigenous populations and worldviews. Who are the ones that could teach us maybe more about dreams and about other sensorial and epistemological ways of dealing with our world? And of course, here in the Netherlands, I guess we're yet protected from all that absurdity, but we have been confronted lately, as you mentioned, with the war in Ukraine. I mean, in scenarios of violence and absurdity in which political actors willingly neglect not only scientific facts, but common human rights. So my question would be, or maybe what I struggle with is this methodology of engaging with dreams, but also in tapping into other layers of consciousness and more subjective approaches to how we see the world and how we can think of problem solving. In this actual context now, makes so much sense, but at the same time feels so futile in relation to this urgency. So long story short, I wanted to know, Sidarta, from you, in working in that specific context, how do you deal with this tug of war? I mean, we got the answer from you, how cognitively, if we get better sleep, if we dream, we might become more empathetic, so on and so forth. But from your experience, how can, in this absurd social political context which you are inserted in, how can dreaming and maybe this combination with the enactment of performance of futures become some sort of social practice that can act now in this present? And maybe the same question can ramify to Danielle and to the Urban Future Studio in a different way. I mean, I'm interested in how flexible these alternative techniques of futuring are in responding to, these fluctuations of what's happening around us. But it's already too much. Sidarta, I would start with you, and sorry that I'm still in the Oneiric realm. I hope you can channel some clarity into this.
Okay, well, I'm really happy that we are here tonight, because even though it may feel like we are doing something that is pointless to all the savagery out there, our best hopes lie in this dialogue. If we put ourselves in the let's say the shoes of our ancestors, if we go back 100,000 years, or if we go back 10,000 years, or if we go back 1,000 years, people were struggling to survive, and there was aggression coming from many possible directions, from human and non-human species. And therefore, the ethics of competition was a necessity. We can think that the people in our ancestry that were not selfish did not leave a lineage. So selfishness was a necessity because there was no food for everybody. This has changed. And throughout the ages, we also kept our ethics of care very well functioning. And without that, we know for sure that all our ancestors were good at that, good enough to leave fertile offsprings. And if we think that way, we can understand that now we got a completely new situation. It's a situation in which there's so much accumulation of capital that, and so much accumulation of knowledge that all can be solved, not just for our species. I'm thinking of cows and chicken and fish and forest. If we just do things right as a group, but the persistence of the ethics of competition is actually menacing the survival of our species and already destroying so many species that this is the sixth largest species extinction ever. So we have little time, but we have enough time, I think, to combine the accumulation of capital and the accumulation of knowledge with something that neither science nor capitalism can provide, which is the ethics of care and responsibility for the collective that allows the strongest to take care of the weakest and not devour them. And this has to be built as a common collective dream that includes everybody. There is no place for, we will not survive in this planet if we do not include everybody. But we have to understand that some positions are so harmful to the others that they need to be reined in. So I think this is the generations now alive are those that will either survive because they were able to put together capitalism, science with wisdom that is ancestral. Those that really know how to dream and dream for the common good. We need to talk to them. We need to talk to the pajés. We need to talk to the shamans. We need to go to Aboriginal Australians. We need to go to sub-Saharan Africa. We need to talk to the pajés and ayahuasca leaders in the Amazon. We need to listen to Maria Sabina. We need to talk to the people that understand how to dialogue with the creatures in the inner world. If we are to get out of this situation we're putting ourselves in, which is to be so competitive and so predatory that we will actually kill billions of people. And this is at stake right now, near us, so near. But I think I like to think of sustaining an optimistic, apocalyptic view of the world. We're at the brink of destruction, but we're also at the brink of an amazing period of enlightenment. It's now possible. It wasn't possible 100 years ago. If Genghis Khan said, let's feed everybody in the world, there was no food for everybody. But now there's food for everybody, there's shelter for everybody, there's clothes for everybody, and there should be arts and sports and science for everybody, because all the boring stuff and dangerous stuff will be done by robots, as announced by Elon Musk as of a few months ago. And he said, I know this is going to take all the jobs, and we need to create a universal, how is this called? Universal stipend, universal wage. But then, he's not being ethical enough to first establish universal wage for everybody, universal stipend, and then selling those robots. And I think we need to understand what is happening. What is happening is that artificial intelligence is going to take all jobs. It already took the jobs of farmers, most farmers, people working in, assembling cars, and soon they're going to take all the other jobs: teachers, medical doctors, scientists, artists. So we need to decide if we teach robots how to love and how to dream,
collectively for the common good, we will have to learn it ourselves. We need to first learn it ourselves and teach it to them. If we don't learn it ourselves, and this is old teachings, right? We can think of Jesus Christ, for example. What is required now, what is adaptive for our species is basically love and understanding and tolerance to manage all this abundance and to make it distributed, right? So as to increase the level of the poor and decrease the level of the rich. A person that has $5 billion and wants more is evidently in need of therapy, evidently in need of help. So we're at the moment in which either we undo all this adoration of the god money that comes from the Bronze Age, and that took a twist with capitalism that it really took pretty much everybody on the planet. If we don't unravel this, and if we don't go towards love and beauty and pleasure and respect, if we don't make this expansion of consciousness in those 1, 2, 3 generations, the future generations will pay so dearly. It's going to be so, what we are leaving for our descendants is so awful. So we really need to do it now, and we don't have much time given the speed of the climate change and given the accumulation, the amazing accumulation of capital in the hands of a few. It's less than 3,000 billionaires in the world. Either they are up to the job of being a billionaire in a world of suffering, or we have no chance. I don't see a chance of dreaming of replacing the powerful for other powerful people. We need to actually convince everybody that this is our home and we need to live well here. And this is possible. Sometimes I have the feeling we are drowning in a half a glass of water. Because now there are technological, economical means to establish this amazing future of pleasure. And at the same time, we are at the brink of nuclear destruction. So it's quite a paradox, and I think this is what this conversation is about. And I give the word back.
Thanks, Sidarta. I thought you were going to leave us in that high positive note, apocalyptic optimism, but then you took us again into a roller coaster. And I don't know if you have something else to add to that, or...
Yeah, I saw that there was also a question in the chat, right?
Yeah. So there's a question from Marlies in the chat. Are you familiar with the future design field currently growing in Japan, and how do you see their methodologies in relation to future studios or the urban future studio specifically? Just a note, the future design was the methodology that we used on the previous urgency intensive, and I think you are familiar with it. And it consists of 2 groups from different generations, one from the present and another one 7 generations ahead, having a discussion about a common problem. This was the first iteration, now they have differences. And I can add the second question that Marlies asks to you. Do you have suggestions for how dreaming or other techniques of futuring could play a larger role in governance and be applied by policymakers?
Yeah, so, okay. That second one is actually really good, and but also a really difficult question. So what I think relates what I'm thinking now relates to what you first asked, is sort of how does that futuring also relate to dreaming and what does it mean for the present? And I think still trying to get my head around how these topics relate that we are talking about today. But I think time and temporality in the long term, and that speaks to that idea of speaking to 7 generations into the future, but also generations into the past. I think something's interesting that happens to us, that we are really in need of thinking about the long term. So there's never the long term, both in terms of where we come from, but especially where we need to go, is as urgent as ever. But we are also at the same time really sucked up by the present. So, and that's also like a really interesting point of conversation with policymakers. How do you work at the long term if you're constantly working on deadlines? So how do you engage with really 2100 2200 when you can't even finish a meeting because you have another meeting. So I think there's a really nice sort of relationship between thinking about dreaming, and I think what Daniel's call for a more slow process in reflecting and writing down your dreams and not being so stressed out that you can't dream at all. So I think there will be one part of my question is really that, and I think for all of us, like how does that relate actually? That really weird that in the past 3 years, how much has happened since the Trump time and then Corona and then the situation where we're in right now, and at the same time we have to deal with the long term. That's such a and then perhaps that's one. And then the other one is I think in terms of more governance. I think it is. Policymakers are really used to futuring when it's with scenario planning or with cost-benefit analysis, but they're also really open to, from at least from my experience, from sort of really alternative ones where there is much more sort of attention for nature, and I think it's also just very much about that we should develop them and involve policymakers in these processes and help them open up. Yeah.
But I think it might connect to what Sidarta was saying that I find it really interesting. That also was a topic of conversation in the dream workshop, where this hypothesis that through dreams you extrapolate your own views and your own opinions, and you have this mental fauna inside your brain. You call it mental democracy, Sidarta. And I wonder if these processes can extrapolate. So this way the work brains while is dreaming and allowing for these divergent voices to coexist with your own could possibly become something that creates more empathy and also political policy-making processes.
Yeah, so this afternoon, I think what I thought from the dreaming assembly was a really nice moment, and I think also that you reacted to that, Daniel, a few times, was that you asked people to think about a voice from a relative, and then people started thinking about or heard their mother or their grandmother, or even sometimes people had three voices in their head: the grandmother, grandfather, and then also their mother, and having really lively conversations. And how often is that actually happening in your life, right? That you bring these voices into the present and have a much more wise and informed reflection on what's going on in your life. And I thought that was a really powerful, I think, moment for me this afternoon. And I think reconnecting with your ancestors through dreaming, I think at least I see that there's a really promising link and very nurturing.
I hope that answers Marlies. Any reactions from behind me? I cannot see you all, sorry. Sidarta, is that a reaction? That was a reaction. Do you want to say something?
Yes, but I can speak after Daniel.
Okay, that's a good compromise.
Yes. Thank you, Sidarta. Yes, I found really inspiring words, specifically in this part. It makes me think at least what the things that I can actually do in order for this overwhelming context and the things that are happening. The war, but only the last couple of years, but also life, that can be just too much sometimes. And I don't really know, Jesse, this part I found really fascinating, the idea of just to imagine and conceiving, to work with the people that make these policies. It felt really, it's such an attractive space for discussion that maybe we can have more after this. But it makes me think of the things that I can actually do. And coming also from Mexico with this huge cultural diversity, but only one official language and only one official educational system. I think the thing that we lived today in the Oneiric Assembly is also something that is, for me, I like to fantasize, and because I realize the relevancy that it has also in academic context, especially with the elementary school, even high school processes. So maybe there won't be any world in when these kids now can be in, working with you in Urban Futures or in Utrecht. I don't really know. But just my point is to address education, to address the possibility to share these ideas, staging, all this, have you shared with us that is really important in the narrative of your work right now, and also what Sidarta is researching for all these years. I would like to know, maybe also Sidarta, adding to your comment that you were going to say, also if you know any experience in public school. I know that the challenges that we are living also in Latin America, specifically in Brazil, maybe it's not the case right now, but maybe perhaps you may know some, will be interesting for you, the possibility of incorporating dreams, collective dreaming in maybe in elementary school, for instance, or even in not only working with artists, because I mean, we like to do these things and it's quite nice, but also with slowly getting there, different speed, as you mentioned. This urgency can be a little bit different time in velocity. But that's maybe my question. Do you have any experience of will be appealing for you the possibility to incorporate dreams in a process of educational system?
Yes, Daniel, this is an important issue, and it's something that we have been discussing. There is an experience that is going on, it has been going on during the pandemic in the city of Belo Horizonte, more or less in the center of Brazil, which is called Escola no Quintal, school in the backyard. And this was, it's in a very poor neighborhood of Belo Horizonte. A couple of capoeira mestre and contramestre, Mestre João Angoleiro and Contramestre Flávia Soares, these two very skilled and respected capoeira practitioners, in particular of capoeira Angola, the more African version of capoeira, they realized at the beginning of the pandemic that the children in their neighborhood were going to be entirely without school for months, but in fact it ended up being 2 years. And they launched an initiative that managed to work with the children using mostly African practices related to theater, to dances, to capoeira itself, to doll making and narratives which involve dream work, which actually has to do with this whole lineage of thought that comes from the Bantu people in Africa. And I think these are things that need to be envisioned, especially if we consider that in many Latin American countries, schools are only open for like 3 to 4 hours. Not the situation in Europe or North America. Well, I don't know how it is in Mexico actually. But in Brazil, most schools are only open from 8 to noon. And then those things become much more complicated. Now I want to go back to something that Jesse triggered, which is this dialogue with the inner creatures, with the creatures of the mind, and how they can enrich us and make us see from different points of view. So one important function of dreaming is to allow us to take multiple perspectives into account. And I believe that, I mean, let's consider this. If the 10 richest people in the world, which are all white men after a certain age, if they had given away 1% of what they have, actually 0.1%, and in fact 0.0001%, they would have managed to vaccinate everybody in the world very fast and homogeneously. So we wouldn't have variants, and most probably the pandemic would have finished by now. They rather doubled their wealth during this period. And they are considered by most people to be the powerful and the strong, and those that are, everybody aspires to beat them. But that actually we can know for a fact that they have an addiction. They're addicted to money and power, and they are most surely not happy. People that are on, during this kind of competition, they are suffering because the other guy is richer than them, and they want to, take over aggressively something from the other person. They are actually playing this very old Paleolithic game of I want to kill you because otherwise you kill me. But nobody wants to kill them. They are fine. If they gave away 99% of their wealth to improve the conditions of schooling in the world, they would still eat their Norwegian or Russian caviar. And they would still drink their champagne, and they would still have their yacht. So there's a problem here, and this what I'm calling this delusional insomnia is actually it's an epidemic. It's a pandemic of suffering. Many people among the wealthiest people, they are suffering. They're depressed. They're taking lots of medicines. They're undergoing lots of surgeries for this or for that. They are unhappy about many things, and then they think they're gonna die, and then they die. And so we have to believe that behind all these corporations and behind all these states at war, there are people, and people are basically children that grew up. So we need to have a serious conversation about how to dream a future that stops the war on people and on other species, and that we can really build this planet, build it properly. We know how to do it now. We have enough. If we gather all the knowledge that is at our disposal now, across cultures, across cultural boundaries, and across generations, and going back into the living memories of dead people that inhabit our inner worlds. Yes, I think, yes, Jesse, in your work I can see that, and also in Danielle's work, and I think in the whole inspiration for this workshop. Yes, we have the means to do it. That's my optimistic note. That no generation before us had all the power that we have to make things function properly in this planet for everybody. So it's something that can be done, and that must be done. And it has to be dreamt. It has to be something that is envisioned and shared. So we need to really go back to this. It's not futile. It's actually a necessity.
Yes.
Hello, Doctor. I really enjoyed your lecture. It was super fascinating, and the other lectures by other two presenters as well. Just by listening what you just said. So first of all, one of the things like really stood out from the lecture for me was about this. Your explanation about damage of dopaminergic. Was it dopaminergic something? Affects people sustain the REM sleep state, but kind of deprive the ability of sleeping. That explanation really resonated with me of my very own personal experience. I lived in New York, the epitome of competition and capitalism, for the last 5 years, which was from 2013 to 2018. And I actually experienced loss of dreaming for about 2 years, and which really surprised me because I always enjoy this exuberance of dreams since I was very young. And I had this very blank period of 2 years, just completely, and I really made me nervous for some reason, because I'm in a creative field, and for some reason, instinctively, I thought it's something really strange thing happening to me, and I thought that I had to escape, and I escaped, and right after that, the COVID pandemic started. So I thought it was a very good decision. But anyway, the point is that I found your point about this insomnia pandemic super interesting, and maybe instead of emphasizing the importance of sleeping or dreaming per se, but maybe we need to think it as a kind of, how can I say, medical emergency somehow, and and think about how to make other people recover from the damage of dreaming loss. Does it make sense? I think because I actually went through this, and it took me like actually 3 years to recover my dream, and now I dream properly, which is amazing. But it required me a lot of not working and just trying to really sleep and nutritional thing and like exercise and everything. So I think it might be quite a difficult thing actually if it's actually dopaminal, like, I mean, as you said, like nervous system problem of medical condition, that it might be difficult to recover actually from that loss. So I'm just curious about your opinion about that. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. It's very interesting and to the point. The system, let's call it the system, the capitalistic system wants time from people, wants their work. And then we all got convinced that we need to give a lot of time to the system. But the system is less and less in need of people's time, because more and more the system is automatic and it runs on its own. It's robots and it's AI and so this is growing. So people, I think what we're currently experiencing is the fact that most people have no time to take time, have no time to stop and ponder, have no time for daydreaming, have no time for night dreaming. They need to do the things that are important in life very fast. They need to eat fast, they need to take care of their children very fast. And I think we're now suffering the consequences of this, which is a lot of people very unhappy and resenting other people. And it has to do, I think, with the emergence of fascism, emergence of ultra-right movements in many places in the world, because they're basically, pounding they're hitting the drum of very old instincts, and this is happening to people that are, that have very little time to do anything that is pleasant. So it's very urgent, and it's in that sense, I think, yes, a medical situation and a medical urgency that we need to address. That people need to have time to eat, have time to sleep, have time to dream, have time to talk about it, have time to exercise, take care of their children, and educate themselves. This is what's needed for the next 100 years. Because the capital is all accumulated. What is going to happen with all this accumulated capital if there are no jobs for nobody in 50 years? Are robots going to be the consumers of the future? And if that is the case, then our future is like a Mad Max future, in which people will be basically looking for food in the trash can. Or we can have a situation in which everybody has a minimum, the minimum is actually fair, and nobody has too much. Every person in the world can aspire to have a yacht. To have 2 or 3 or 4, this is a medical problem. This is something that needs to be addressed. People need therapy. They need, to do things that are more pleasant than compete with each other and try to get money from each other. And if we don't address it frontally, it's gonna eat us all up.
Thank you so much, Sidarta, Jesse, Danielle, everyone. There's more questions online, but I don't think there's any more brain capacity. And just to remind everyone who was at the dreaming workshop tonight that we'll meet at 3 a.m., huh? In a place with water and wind. We'll invite you also, Sidarta, if you want to join. Feel free to meet us there. Thank you so much for everything, Jan van Eyck staff and everyone in the backstage to help make this possible. Rudy, Guedj for designing the identity. Luisa for helping us with the communication with Sidarta. And everyone else that I might forget, but thank you so much. See you in the Urgency Intensive in September, maybe before. Thank you, Sidarta. Have a good evening in Lisbon.
You too. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.